Some truths hide in silence, waiting for the right moment to shatter everything. A love once believed unshakable can crumble when a forgotten phone breathes life into buried lies. Each message cuts deeper, stripping away the illusion of a loyal heart, revealing that the marriage you thought was yours may have been the stage for someone else's love story all along. And sometimes the betrayal doesn't start here. It's woven through generations, passed down like an heirloom no one dares to speak of. The cruelest part, discovering it began long before the vows were even spoken. Here we unravel every twist, every shocking secret, every hidden truth, piece by piece. If you believe you're ready to face the kind of stories that stay with you long after they're told, you're in the right place. Love once felt like stone, solid, unmovable, something that could weather storms without cracking. The kind of love that made the world feel safe, even when everything else was uncertain. But silence has a way of hiding things, and shadows have a habit of swallowing the truth until it can no longer be ignored. It began with small moments, barely noticeable at first, the quiet pauses between conversations that used to flow effortlessly. The way his eyes sometimes wandered in thought when they should have been grounded in the present. The growing weight in the air, too faint to be named but too real to dismiss. There was no reason to question it. At least, that's what the heart wanted to believe. After all, love this strong wasn't supposed to fracture. But lies don't always announce themselves with loud confessions. Sometimes they hide in the stillness. They live in the space between words, in the way someone holds back when they should lean in. The heart senses it before the mind can accept it, a tightening in the chest, a whisper that something is not as it seems. One evening, while the house lay still, a sound broke the silence, a faint vibration from somewhere deep inside a drawer. An old phone, untouched for years, lay there as though it had been waiting. The screen lit up, its battery barely alive, and curiosity reached for it before hesitation could speak. The lock was the same, as though no one ever thought it would matter again. The moment it opened, the shadows stepped forward. The inbox was filled with fragments of another life, words that dripped with tenderness and longing, the kind of words that had once been given freely, but not to the person who stood by his side now. Each message was a thread, and pulling on one unraveled, a tapestry of years. Years of deception, masked behind the comfort of routine. The realization burned slowly at first. The love once felt was not a shared creation, but a borrowed one, stolen from somewhere else and painted over to fit this life. Every memory that once brought warmth now twisted into a question. Were those smiles genuine? Were those promises meant at all? The weight of knowing grew heavier with each line read, each date and time marking a moment when truth could have been spoken but never was. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was the careful way it had been hidden. The effort it must have taken to live in two truths, to build a life on one side while feeding a love on the other, and the silence, the cruel, suffocating silence that made it possible. Trust doesn't break with a crash. It unravels like a thread, slipping quietly through fingers until there's nothing left to hold. What had once felt unshakable now lay in pieces, not from a sudden blow, but from the slow erosion of years. The foundation had been crumbling all along. The shadows that rose from that drawer were not just his. They belonged to the years that came before, to choices that had been made long before vows were exchanged. And in the quiet after the discovery, the air felt different, heavier, colder, the kind of air that settles in when something has ended, even if no one has said it aloud yet. Some truths do not set you free. They leave you standing in the wreckage of everything you thought was real, forcing you to see love not as it was promised, but as it truly was. And once you've seen that, there's no going back. It sat there, tucked away in the back of the drawer, coated in a thin layer of dust as if the years had tried to bury it. The weight of it in hand felt heavier than it should, as though it carried something more than just metal and glass. There was no reason to turn it on, at least not one that could be explained, but something about the way it seemed to be waiting demanded it. The screen flickered to life, its glow spilling across the darkness of the room. The passcode was the same, muscle memory, unlocking it with ease, almost too easily, as if fate wanted what came next to happen. A familiar wallpaper filled the screen, but it wasn't the image that drew the breath tighter. It was the notifications that popped up, each one carrying a name that had no place there. Opening the messages felt like stepping into another life. The first words read were simple, almost harmless on their own, but beneath them lay a current that spoke of something far more intimate. Lines filled with affection, phrases dripping with a tenderness that had been missing for so long. The dates went back years, stretching far beyond the excuses that might have softened their meaning. Scrolling through them was like walking deeper into a maze with no exit. Every new thread unraveled a little more of what was thought to be true. There were plans made, secrets shared, promises whispered that were never meant for the one who believed they held his heart. Some messages carried the raw thrill of early attraction, others the aching familiarity of a love that had been sustained in shadows. It was not fleeting, it had been there all along. The realization came slowly at first, then all at once. The moments once cherished were not untouched. They had been shared with someone else in parallel. Words once believed to be unique had been recycled, passed along like currency to maintain two separate worlds. It wasn't just betrayal. It was an entire life lived behind a curtain, carefully hidden but always present. The deeper the search went, the more it became clear this wasn't an accident or a lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, a choice sustained over time, requiring intention, planning, and the ability to smile without revealing the storm brewing underneath. There were photos too, small stolen glimpses of another world, another connection that had existed right under the same roof. The phone became less an object and more a portal, pulling back the veil on years of deception. Each discovery was a cut, not sharp enough to kill, but deep enough to bleed trust out until there was nothing left. The voice on the other side of those words was familiar now, almost haunting, because it was clear this person had been more than just a secret. They had been the truth, the one he had chosen in ways that words could no longer deny. It wasn't rage that came first. It was the crushing weight of understanding. Understanding that the smiles, the promises, the moments that seemed so real were layered over something else entirely. Understanding that while one life was built together, another had been thriving in silence. The phone held it all, unflinching and unrepentant, offering no chance for him to rewrite the past. Closing it didn't erase what had been seen. The drawer could be shut, the dust could settle again, but the truth no longer belonged to the shadows. It was here now, unmovable, stripping away the last illusions and leaving only the cold, undeniable reality. Some lies are loud, shattering everything in a single blow. Others wait quietly, buried deep, until the moment they rise and change everything forever. Every word seemed harmless until it wasn't. The first message felt like a whisper meant for someone else, a private tone that didn't belong in this life. But then came another and another, each one sharper, cutting through the fragile comfort of what was once believed to be true. The sentences weren't just sentences. They were blades, slicing away years of trust, peeling back the layers until the truth stood bare and unrecognizable. There was a rhythm to them, a language that spoke of history, of closeness built over time. Affection dripped from every line, the kind of intimacy that could never be mistaken for friendship. The dates stretched back further than the mind could process without feeling sick. Words of longing sent when the air between these walls was filled with laughter. Promises made on nights that should have belonged to only one person. The phone felt heavier with each scroll, as though it knew it was delivering the final blows to a story carefully crafted to look perfect from the outside. Each message was a confession without apology, revealing not just a single betrayal, but a long, deliberate devotion to someone else. The realization dug deep, not just that the heart had strayed, but that it had never fully belonged. Some of the messages were playful, laced with the teasing of a love unafraid to be bold in its secrecy. Others were tender, the kind of words that should only be spoken in the quiet safety of a shared life. They weren't typed in haste. They carried weight, thought, and the ease of someone who knew exactly how to be understood. That was the part that hurt the most, not just the love itself, but the care put into nurturing it. The mind replayed moments now tainted, holidays, anniversaries, mornings shared over coffee, while somewhere else, another part of his heart was being fed. It became clear that every word ever spoken in this house had been competing with words typed on that screen. The image of loyalty, the comfort of belonging, had been nothing more than a mask carefully held in place, and with each new message, that mask cracked a little more. The truth didn't shout. It whispered in the softest, most devastating ways. It revealed itself in the familiarity between them, in the casual way love was expressed, as if there were no fear of being discovered. These weren't stolen moments of impulse. They were the evidence of a parallel life, built slowly and deliberately, while another life carried on in ignorance. By the time the last message was read, the illusion had been completely dismantled. The loyal heart once believed in was nothing more than an invention, a role played to perfection while the real devotion lay elsewhere. The blade had done its work, not in a sudden, violent strike, but in the quiet persistence of 1,000 small cuts. There was no undoing what had been seen, no softening it, no hope of returning to the version of life that existed before those words were read. The truth now lived here, and it could not be silenced. Some wounds bleed forever, not because of the damage itself, but because of the trust that will never grow back. It had always looked like devotion. From the outside, there was nothing to suggest otherwise. Shared smiles at gatherings, intertwined hands during walks, quiet moments that seemed to speak of a deep and steady love, the kind of marriage people envied, one that appeared built on mutual respect and unwavering loyalty. But appearances have a way of deceiving, especially when they've been so carefully crafted. The truth did not come crashing down in a single moment. It emerged in fragments, each one small enough to be ignored on its own, but impossible to dismiss when pieced together. The way his phone seemed to disappear into his pocket at the sound of a message, the distracted look in his eyes, like his mind was always partly somewhere else, the unexplainable silences brushed off as tiredness or stress. Little things, harmless in isolation, yet when combined, they formed a picture that didn't match the one that had been believed for so long. When the full truth revealed itself, it became impossible to unsee the stage that had been set. Every gesture of love, every public show of unity had been part of a performance. The audience, family, friends, even the one standing closest, was meant to believe in the story being told, and it worked because the illusion had been rehearsed for years. But behind the curtain, the real script had been written for someone else. The private words, the true moments of tenderness, belonged to another. The promises spoken in hushed tones were never meant for the person they were shared with in the daylight. While one life played out in plain sight, another unfolded in the shadows, richer, truer, and far more dangerous. Looking back, every moment took on a different meaning. That sudden trip out of town wasn't just business. The late nights weren't just extra hours at work. Even the affectionate gestures now felt hollow, like lines in a play delivered with skill, but without soul. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the theft of something sacred. The marriage had been used as a cover, a beautiful backdrop for a love story that didn't belong to it. The most painful part wasn't the existence of someone else. It was realizing that all the years of shared life had been the supporting act to a romance hidden away. The laughter, the shared dreams, the plans for the future. none of it had been untouched. Every piece of it had been built on the foundation of another love, one strong enough to survive in silence. It was a cruel kind of genius, the way it had been maintained. Every detail was tended to just enough to keep the illusion alive. There was always enough attention, enough affection, enough effort to keep suspicion at bay. And yet, the truest parts of his heart were elsewhere. The stage had been lit perfectly, the costumes flawless, the script delivered without falter. But in the quiet, in the unseen corners, the real story played on. And once the curtain was pulled back, the set crumbled. Some truths don't just end love. They reveal it was never truly yours to begin with. Betrayal has a way of feeling new when it cuts, but some wounds are older than anyone dares to admit. It doesn't always begin in the moment it's discovered. Sometimes it's born years before, in choices made by others, in patterns repeated so often they become part of the bloodline. What unfolded was not just an act of disloyalty. It was the continuation of a story written long before the vows were spoken. The signs were there, tucked into family history like fragile pages in an old book. Whispers about affairs no one openly acknowledged. Half-truths told to children to protect them from realities they weren't meant to understand. Stories of a grandfather's wandering heart, a father's friendships that lasted too long, a mother's quiet acceptance of things that would have broken others. It had always been there, this thread, weaving its way through time, binding one generation's sins to the next. He wore the same charm, the same easy smile that could make lies sound like poetry. The same way of deflecting questions with just enough warmth to erase suspicion. At first, it felt like a coincidence, but the more the truth unfolded, the clearer it became. He wasn't just making his own choices. He was carrying the legacy forward. The names and faces changed, but the pattern stayed the same. The betrayal didn't exist in isolation. It had roots, tangled deep into the soil of his upbringing. He had learned early how to keep two lives separate, how to give just enough of himself to each to keep both alive. The old phone, the hidden messages, the stolen glances, they weren't mistakes or impulses. They were habits, refined over years of watching others do the same. It was in the way his family spoke about loyalty, carefully, vaguely, as though it was more of an idea than a commitment. It was in the way stories about past infidelities were told with a smirk, as if they were part of some unspoken tradition. And it was in the way no one ever seemed shocked when the truth surfaced, only quietly resigned, as though they'd been expecting it all along. Every revelation pulled the thread tighter, weaving this betrayal into a larger, older tapestry. It wasn't just about a man and the vows he'd broken. It was about the generations before him, each adding their own stitch of deception, passing down the skill of lying with a steady voice and warm eyes. It was about the silent lessons taught in childhood, that love could coexist with betrayal, that secrets were simply part of keeping a family together. Realizing this didn't dull the pain, it made it sharper. It meant there had never been a chance. The promises made on the wedding day weren't a break from the past. They were an unknowing continuation of it. The stage had been set decades before, the lines rehearsed in another man's life, the same ending already written. Some people inherit wealth, land, or names. Others inherit silence, infidelity, and the art of living in two truths. The moment the truth came to light, it felt like the floor had given way. But the deeper the digging went, the more it became clear. This wasn't a crack that had formed over time. It had been there from the beginning, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to collapse. The betrayal didn't start after the vows were spoken. It had been planted long before, rooted in a history that had nothing to do with the marriage and everything to do with the man who stood there, smiling on that day as though every promise were unshakable. The evidence didn't just tell of recent lies, It reached backward, through years never spoken of, through relationships never admitted. The first messages uncovered weren't new. They were the continuation of a thread that began before the marriage ever existed. The tone between them carried the ease of familiarity, the kind that only comes from a bond long established. They didn't read like the start of something forbidden. They read like the continuation of something that had always been there, lingering in the background like a shadow that never left. Every discovery made the past feel like a carefully written script. Those early days, the ones meant to be the foundation of a shared future, were already compromised. The promises spoken then were hollow, not because they weren't delivered with conviction, but because his heart was already split. The marriage was not the beginning of a life together. It was the layering of one life over another, the blending of truth and lies into something that looked real enough to survive under the gaze of others. What hurt the most wasn't the infidelity itself, but the realization that there had never been a clean slate. There was no moment in time when the love was untouched, when it was whole and untainted. Even the sweetest memories had been born in the shadow of someone else's presence. Every kiss, every late night conversation, every shared dream had been colored by a history that had no place in this marriage. The depth of the deception was suffocating. It meant that the life built together had been compromised from the start, that trust had been misplaced long before there was a reason to doubt. The betrayal wasn't a sudden fracture in something strong. It was a flaw that had been there all along, hidden well enough to pass for perfection. Looking back, certain moments stood out in a way they hadn't before. The evasive answers when questions about the past came up. The way certain names caused a flicker in his expression, gone so quickly it could be dismissed as nothing. The unexplained disappearances during those early months together, brushed off with excuses that now felt rehearsed. It was all there, waiting to be seen, but love has a way of softening the edges of suspicion. The cruelest part was knowing that there had never been a chance to protect what was thought to be theirs alone. By the time the marriage began, the truth had already woven itself through every part of it. There was no point in time to return to, no untouched place to stand. The betrayal wasn't just an event, it was the foundation itself. Some wounds are made deeper not by the act itself, but by the knowledge that they began long before you ever knew to guard your heart. If this story gripped you, there's more where it came from. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next secret waiting to be exposed. Some truths can't stay buried forever.